Right, yay, good morning. It's so great to see you guys. Emily Renn from Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, Erin Hunt from Lobos of the Southwest, and Greta Anderson. So wonderful to have you here from Western Watersheds, our first year together. So I'm thrilled to have you. And Michael Schroeder, who is a Sedona local, lives here with me in town, and I came across Mike because he was featured in our local newspaper for donating his time to help cross-foster pups. So we invited him to be a part of this discussion today. What I'm going to do is turn the monitor over to you guys. I believe we're going to start with Emily Renn. And Emily, please just give a quick introduction of your organization and go ahead and share your screen and start the presentation.
Great, thanks Betsy, and thanks so much to Plan B and Apex Protection Project for hosting us in Sedona Wolf Week this year. Let's see if I get this. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint? Yeah, okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm Emily Renn. I'm the Executive Director of the Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project. I'm based in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I'm going to start off our panel just giving you a little brief history of the Mexican wolf program and the current status. Okay. I moved my arrow away from my computer, so I couldn't switch the slide. But okay, so the Mexican gray wolf is a unique subspecies of the northern gray wolf. It's Canis lupus bailey, also known as the Lobos or Los Lobos. They are a smaller wolf. They're about 50 to 80 pounds in size, and they always have this tan, cream coloration in their coat, along with some gray and a little bit of black. So they blend in very beautifully with the Southwest environment. They are native to the American Southwest and Mexico, but were eradicated by humans in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So by 1976, they were listed under the Endangered Species Act. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the federal agency responsible for their reintroduction. So in the late 1970s, once they were listed under the Endangered Species Act, they started a captive breeding program to save the species from extinction. There were only 7 individual unrelated Mexican wolves left alive. And so they formed the founders of all Mexican wolves that are alive today in the population. They're all descendants from just those 7 individual wolves. So they did go through this severe genetic bottleneck that continues to threaten the recovery as we go forward today, because they come from such limited genetic diversity. There are about 50 facilities around the US and Mexico that are part of the captive breeding program, and they are the caretakers of about 350 wolves in captivity today. So once there were enough Mexican wolves in the captive breeding program, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service prepared to reintroduce them back into the wild of Arizona and New Mexico. This photo is from the first release of Mexican wolves on March 29th, 1998. So we're now about 23 years into the recovery process in the Southwest. You're not seeing that little panel across the top of my screen there. Hopefully that's not blocking your view. But so the current status today is at 186 wolves in the wild in Arizona and New Mexico. That population has grown very slowly over the last 23 years, and this is now currently the highest population count ever in the wild population in the US since the beginning of the reintroduction. That official population count is from the end of 2020, And so we're expecting the official population count for 2021 will take place coming up this January and February. There were 20 breeding pairs in 2020 that had pups surviving until at least the end of the year. Currently, there are 44 packs and 5 single wolves in the US population. That consists of 17 packs in Arizona and 27 packs in New Mexico. 83 wolves have radio or GPS tracking collars. So the interagency field team that monitors the wolves in the wild, they do try and capture and place tracking collars on at least the breeding pair in every pack, as well as any other adults that they can capture in each pack in the wild to track their movements. This year, there were 22 captive-born pups that were cross-fostered into wild dens in 2021. So I'll let Greta and Erin talk a little bit more about the cross-foster program. But there are also about 40 wolves in the wild in Mexico. So the country of Mexico started their reintroduction program in 2011, and they've slowly been building up their wild population as well. This is the map of the current, what's called the MWIPA, or the Mexican Wolf Experimental Population Area. So under the Endangered Species Act, Mexican wolves are given the 10J status, which is a special status under endangered, that's basically considered the experimental non-essential reintroduced population in the wild. You can see here in this map, there's zone 1, which is kind of the core reintroduction area where wolves can be released from captivity into the wild. And then wolves from zone 1 can disperse out into zone 2 through natural dispersal, but there are no initial releases into zone 2. And then zone 3 is an area that's not considered a lot of suitable wolf habitat. So wolves that would move out into zone 3 could be actively managed in those areas and potentially removed. There is also a hardline boundary at Interstate 40 that runs through Arizona and New Mexico. So any wolves currently that cross out of the Mexican wolf experimental population area north of I-40 will be captured and either removed and translocated back into the core zone 1 area, or they could be captured and placed in captivity. And this is wholly based on politics and not the actual biology of Mexican wolves. So you can see here, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, from their own models of suitable wolf habitat in Arizona and New Mexico, have shown that there's still a lot of suitable wolf habitat north of I-40 as well. It's actually kind of hard to tell from this map, but within the MWIPA, south of I-40, there's about just over 32,000 square miles of suitable wolf habitat. And the area actually north of I-40 contains about 31,000 square miles of suitable wolf habitat. So it would actually nearly double the current suitable habitat available for Mexican wolves. And of course, this would actually be increased even further if the models also included some of the habitat suitable for wolves in southern Utah and southern Colorado as well. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has recognized and wrote in their own 2015 10J EIS that there is suitable habitat north of I-40. These are very rural communities and counties in northern Arizona, New Mexico, and climate change could also make this suitable habitat very important for the recovery of Mexican wolves going forward. However, they still maintain this hardline boundary at I-40. You can see here on this map that from the core recovery area, there's this continuous corridor of suitable habitat that follows right up along the Mogollon Rim to the Grand Canyon region of northern Arizona. So with that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about a recent story that's been very exciting in the news this year. You may have heard about Anubis, who is a young male Mexican gray wolf that has dispersed to the Flagstaff area this year. He was actually born into the Dark Canyon Pack in the Gila National Forest of New Mexico in April of 2020. And then this year, he received a tracking collar at the last official population count in the winter of 2021. And then by April of this year, he started dispersing away from the core recovery area and had followed right along that corridor of suitable wolf habitat up along the Mogollon Rim to cross north of I-40 west of Flagstaff. At first, he crossed in May of this year, and then he spent about 4 months roaming around on the National Forest north of Flagstaff on the Coconino National Forest and the Kaibab National Forest north and west of Flagstaff. So thankfully in June, we found out that, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you cut out there.
Oh, sorry.
About the last 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So
hey, if that's all that happens, we're good.
Okay, so I was just mentioning that he has been north of I-40. He was roaming around the National Forest on the Coconino and Kaibab National Forest since May of 2021 this year. And then in June, we found out that the Arizona Game and Fish Department was actively trying to capture him. And so we trying to kick into action to do our best to protect him wherever he was roaming and allow him to maintain his freedom in northern Arizona. So unfortunately, in August, mid-August this year, he was captured by Arizona Game and Fish and then translocated into the core recovery area along the border with New Mexico. So very quickly after he was translocated and released, he actually started dispersing again. And so back through August and September, he made the same movements right up along the Mogollon Rim, and he is now back to the area north of I-40, west and north of Flagstaff, that he was hanging out this summer. So he definitely wants to be here. You can see from this photo, I just took this photo about 2 weeks ago when I was out exploring the area where he's roaming, and you can see there's plenty of elk and deer in this area. It's beautiful habitat. It's excellent for wolves. This is high elevation, generally kind of between 7,000 and 10,000 feet elevation. So he's back right now, and he's made this dispersal journey twice, traveling over 200 miles both times to get back to this area. So we're just asking everybody, if you are able, to take a minute to go to our action alert and send an email to the Arizona Game and Fish Department, asking them to please leave him alone and to make sure that he is protected and the public knows that he is a protected, fully endangered wolf wherever he roams. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greta.
If I unmute. Hi, are you able to see my screen now? The purple one? Okay, thank you. So I am going to talk a little bit today about the primary roadblock to recovery that I work on with Western Watersheds project. We we focus primarily on the effects of livestock grazing in Mexican wolf habitat. And livestock grazing in Mexican wolf habitat has a few, well, first I should say there's lots of roadblocks to recovery. There's a lot of reasons why the population numbers have stayed low, but a primary threat is livestock grazing, which has both direct and indirect effects on wolf recovery. So a few of them are the displacement of prey, the creation of conflict, the sort of generation of opposition to the program, and the constraints that livestock grazers place on recovery, the recovery area, like the boundary that Emily was talking about, and opportunities. So when I am talking about livestock grazing displacing native prey, you can see here a side of the fence that's grazed and the side that's ungrazed. The livestock are taking the percent that's grazed, and the equivalent livestock, each cow, it's the equivalent of 2 elk, 7 deer, or 10 pronghorn. So every time you see a cow on public land, imagine that it could be this much wolf food instead. And so with 50% of the forage on national forests going to livestock, we're displacing an enormous amount of native prey that wolves would otherwise be eating, and replacing them with domestic livestock, which are privately owned and which the wolves get in trouble for eating. In fact, wolves get in trouble for eating livestock that are left out on the range, in some places year-round, calving all the time. They have lives. The heifers are bred and calve all year round as a way of exploiting availability for market opportunities, so that not all calves come at the same time. I just had a weird noise. I don't know if you guys heard that. Anyway, but they're left untended. Rarely do you see cowboys with their herds. And so these vulnerable animals are just left out to be food for predators. The other problem with the calving seasons is that there's baby cows out there without supervision or protection all winter long, which is before elk and deer have their babies in the spring. We see a lot of predation on livestock in the winter, as opposed to the spring when there's other easy native food. So this may be a little hard to see, but the green lines show what are called livestock allotments within the wolf recovery area on the Apache Sitgraves and Gila National Forests. Here's the Gila, here's the Apache Sitgraves. Those are all grazing allotments that are stocked with cattle and permitted to different ranches. And by ranch, some of them are, family ranches, very few. Some are major corporations that truck their cows in from Texas to get the cheap forage on public lands. And so keeping in mind all of that area that's designated for livestock grazing, you can see that these are the alleged depredation events by wolves within the recovery area between 1998, when wolves were introduced, and 2020. And this is the first ever public map of the alleged depredations, and it's up online. I'll put the link in the chat. But you can see that the depredations are not evenly distributed. Despite the fact that all of those allotments have livestock, there are only a few allotments that have repeated problems. So we started to ask the question, why are there some high conflict allotments? For example, in New Mexico last year, just one allotment claimed all of the losses in the state for the year. So we started thinking, well, what is it about livestock management that needs to change? Maybe they need to start moving the calves. Maybe they need more range riders and cowboys out on the range with them. Maybe they need to be checking in with their cows more, because once the livestock are injured, they become very easy prey for wolves. And then we started asking, and what about those depredation reports anyway? And you'll notice I said alleged depredations, because as Western Watersheds Project reviewed hundreds, literally hundreds of depredation reports that we received from USDA's Wildlife Services in the last 5 years, we started to find a lot of suspicious things. So these are the actual reports when Wildlife Services goes out to investigate what may be a wolf kill. They fill out these forms, take their photos, and submit it. And in general, there's really, really high confirmation rates. So just last year in Arizona, there were 91 times that Wildlife Services was called out to see if a wolf was involved in a cattle death or injury. Of the 91, 67% were determined to involve wolves, but 93% of those were considered confirmed. And you can see over on this slide, there's confirmed, probable, and possible. And ranchers get compensated more for confirmed than they do for probable or possible livestock depredations. So that's important to keep in mind. 93% are confirmed, but in New Mexico, 99% are confirmed. A much higher number of the investigations are determined to be wolves, and nearly all of them are certain to be wolves. But if you look at these depredation reports, you can see sometimes the evidence is very scant. And in this case, they literally used a pile of wolf scat and a couple of bones to say that this was a wolf kill. That was the only other evidence in the area. They did not have bite marks. They did not have other details except that there were wolves in the area of the carcass, which was completely confirmed, and therefore it was a probable wolf kill. So you can see sometimes there's some interesting conclusions being drawn. This one was in Arizona. Here's one from New Mexico. That is a dried piece of cattle carcass that they found 3 months prior to the investigation. They then took the dried carcass and soaked it in water in order to measure the bite marks. And they said that, and they reported that this was really just soft tissue, no soft tissue, that it was basically, the cow carcass was long gone. But because there were collared and uncollared wolves in the area, and with the other evidence present, this cow was killed by Mexican wolves. Well, there was no other evidence present, and they admitted that in their report. They also estimated the time of death 3 months to be 3 months prior. So this carcass was 3 months old, and it's unclear whether the collared wolves were in the area 3 months ago or at the time of the investigation, but nonetheless confirmed to be a wolf kill. They also rely a lot on canine spreads, which is the distance between the teeth, and Mexican wolf canine spreads overlap considerably with other species. Here's another example. This was all they had of the calf, but somehow they knew that the wolves had eaten its rear end to its head first. And there was no other additional evidence. And this was also a confirmed wolf kill. One distinction that they don't make is sometimes they find wolf marks, teeth marks on the carcasses, but they don't know if those, depending on the type of marks, they don't know whether it was wolf kill or wolf scavenge. And that's important because cows die all the time out there. They die of poisoning, sickness, other predators. Many of them die giving birth. Calves are born stillborn, and then they get scavenged by wolves who learn that that's a really good source of food. The problem with depredation reports being based on faulty rationales is that it basically convinces the public that wolves are bloodthirsty killers. And so there's misperceptions about how wolves are affecting livestock producers. It also costs taxpayers a bunch of money because we pay the ranchers back for lost and injured livestock. And if that's based on false evidence, we may be wasting our money. once there's a wolf that's been blamed for several depredations, there's a lot of pressure to remove those wolves or the entire pack. Those removals compound the genetic crisis. And sometimes, even if it's not a lethal removal, like they're not out there to kill the wolf, they do end up accidentally killing the wolves because wolves can't handle the stress of being captured. And you can see there were 206 wolves removed through the life of the program till 2019, and most of those were related to livestock grazing. The other issue is that by creating hostility to adult wolves, it creates an opposition to adult wolf releases. And so the opposition to adult and family pack releases also leaves a cap at the number of cross-fostered pups that can be released per year. Another problem is just that the hatred of wolves leads to illegal killings, and 70% of Mexican wolf deaths are human caused. Unfortunately, prosecution is very rare. So what you can do is advocate for public lands to be managed in a way that reduces livestock conflict, or support groups like mine that do, report suspicious activity in wolf country and spread the word about the availability of reward money, and share information about species identification to distinguish wolves from coyotes. And that's it for me. And Erin, do you want to go next?
Okay, can you hear me okay? And hopefully you can see my screen. All right, well, thank you everyone for having me here today. My name is Erin Hunt, and I'm the coordinator for Lobos of the Southwest. Lobos of the Southwest is a collaborative effort of conservation organizations, scientists, educators, and volunteers working to recover the critically endangered Mexican gray wolf. Our shared vision is a future in which healthy, viable populations of Mexican gray wolves restore the balance to southwestern landscapes, keep elk and deer herds healthy, and enhance the natural functioning of entire ecosystems. Mexican gray wolves are valued by Southwestern residents and visitors as an intrinsic part of our natural heritage and as beautiful, intelligent wild animals that contribute to our quality of life. So humans are impacting the unique and fragile ecosystems that are found in the Southwest. But we also have a second chance to correct mistakes of the past and restore this landscape. The effort to reintroduce Mexican gray wolves to the Southwest is very much a part of that hope for a wilder future. But it's a complicated story. But with 186 Mexican gray wolves in the wild in Arizona and New Mexico, and about 40 in Mexico, Mexican gray wolves are one of the rarest land mammals in North America. Human-caused mortality is still the #1 threat to Mexican gray wolves. Low tolerance for wolves can result in high levels of illegal killing and tragic loss for such an imperiled population. Because all Mexican gray wolves alive today are descended from 7 unrelated founders, most wild Mexican gray wolves are as closely related to each other as full siblings. And that lack of gene diversity continues to put the subspecies at risk, making it harder for these rare wolves to maintain their resilience and adapt to a changing environment. There are also management policies in place that artificially limit their range within political boundaries rather than based on suitable habitat. Their habitat is being threatened by human impacts, including livestock grazing and climate change. But hope is not lost. Thanks to the efforts of conservation organizations and zoos and the Mexican Wolf Species Survival Plan, or SSP, along with researchers, educators, volunteers, other conservation groups, and tribal, state, and federal agencies, we have opportunities to ensure that Mexican gray wolves get the second chance they deserve. The Mexican Wolf Species Survival Plan, or SSP, is the captive breeding program for critically endangered Mexican gray wolves. This SSP is special because nearly every wolf in the program is considered a candidate for potential release. The SSP works hard to ensure that all wolves are kept as wild as possible so that they can be returned to parts of their former range. Since it began in the 1970s, the work of the Mexican Wolf SSP remains an essential component of Mexican wolf recovery in the wild. Not only did the captive breeding program save the subspecies from extinction, the captive breeding population is the main source of gene diversity that will ensure the long-term health and survival of Mexican gray wolves. Approximately 60 institutions in the SSP are both in the United States and Mexico, and we applaud their tireless efforts to hold extinction at bay and educate people about these rare wolves. But the work of wolf recovery is far from done. Since 2016, 72 pups have been cross-fostered from the captive breeding program into the wild, with the numbers going up each year to a record 22 pups in 2021. However, according to Mexican Wolf Interagency Field-Team data, only 11 of these wolves are currently documented as surviving as of September 2021, and of these, only 7 have survived to breeding age, and only 4 have had pups of their own. While there may be additional surviving cross-fosters in the wild, 4 wolves being able to start families in 5 years will not be sufficient to achieve the genetic rescue needed to ensure the long-term survival of the Mexican gray wolf. The Mexican Wolf SSP should be celebrated for their contributions to cross-fostering, but they can do so much more to support wild recovery if they're also allowed to release well-bonded packs who could immediately boost the size of the wild population, improve gene diversity through the release of wolves that are already of breeding age, and expand the range occupied by wolves. One of the biggest barriers to recovery is the human one. Its lack of tolerance for wolves and other carnivores. We continue to have record-breaking years for both livestock predation and illegal killing of Mexican gray wolves. We've also seen an increase in government removals of wolves, with 2020 being the worst year for removals since 2006. Conflict between wolves and livestock, and conflict between diverse groups of people who may have different ways of valuing land and wildlife continue to threaten wolves. And unless we can rise above that challenge and learn from the past, we run the risk of history repeating itself, the risk of losing these animals to extinction forever. Mexican wolf families are just like ours. We want our families to feel safe in their homes, to have what they need, to not only survive, but to thrive. Don't wolf families deserve the same? Our call to action is about keeping wolves alive in the wild without the risk of being killed or captured. We need less wolf management and more wolf conservation. Through a shift in policies that puts wolves and other native wildlife first. Mexican gray wolves help restore balance to ecosystems, having a positive impact on many species. Healthy, functional ecosystems filled with the species that belong there benefit everyone. Mexican gray wolves are an iconic species native to the Southwest and Mexico, and restoring them to the wild places they belong preserves the natural heritage of this unique region. And this benefits both residents and visitors and honors the values of the many people who appreciate wolves and want them to recover in the wild. Through grassroots efforts, we can have big effects on people, landscapes, and wolves. One important opportunity to create change from the grassroots up is the Mexican wolf 10J management rule. Because Mexican gray wolves were wiped out in the wild and needed to be reintroduced, their management in the wild is covered by a special section of the Endangered Species Act that governs experimental populations and a series of policies called the 10J management rule. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is currently revising this rule, which a federal court found does not rely on the best available science and violates the Endangered Species Act by failing to conserve the Mexican wolf. Now the agency must follow the court order and base the revised rule on independent academic science rather than political pressure. We have 90 days to make a difference for Mexican gray wolves and the wild places they call home. We need to act now to tell the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service what we want to see in a 10-day management rule. The science-based 10-day rule will designate Mexican gray wolves as essential, giving them full protection under the law. It will provide freedom from arbitrary and unscientific boundaries, allowing population growth and dispersal so Mexican wolves can play their natural role as top predators. It will address the crisis of declining genetic diversity and include measurable genetic standards. It will require the release of well-bonded families into the wild, taking into consideration the highly social nature of wolves and the fact that they need their packs to survive and thrive. It will limit intentional human-caused mortality, cracking down on illegal killing. It will include firm requirements to prevent conflicts with livestock and support non-lethal resolution of conflicts. It will also hold the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service accountable for actual results and not just be a wish list of goals. Mexican wolves need all of us to facilitate policy changes that give them the freedom to roam and expand to suitable habitat. Science tells us that we need at least 750 to 1,000 Mexican wolves in several populations, 3 in the United States and 1 in Mexico. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's plan to manage for an average of 320 Mexican wolves in Arizona and New Mexico is inadequate for ensuring their long-term recovery. The best wolf scientists in the world agree we need more wolves in more places, and we need to let them roam, accommodating them in the habitat they need to recover. We can predict that wildlife species will shift their ranges in response to climate change, and Mexican wolves will likely move further northward if allowed to do so. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service must adequately address the potential changes in wolf habitat, prey species, water and vegetation distribution, and wolf movements due to the impacts of climate change in the revised Mexican wolf 10-day management rule by removing the northern boundary. Wolves are a wide range of species that naturally disperses, traveling from their birth packs, sometimes for hundreds or thousands of miles. They need freedom from political barriers and safe ways to cross physical barriers, such as wildlife crossings near highways. Since wolves have not yet established themselves in some of the best available habitat, we need to ensure that there are linkages across the landscape that will allow wolves to successfully return to these areas. We also need to ensure that the population in Mexico and the United States remain connected to maintain gene flow between them. We're cross-fostering more pups every year, giving them a chance to grow up in the wild. But what kind of life will that be if we don't also take steps to safeguard their future by doing everything we can to prevent wolf livestock conflict, illegal killings, and heavy-handed government management that limits their freedom and their ability to recover? We believe that wolves can thrive in suitable habitat when we take steps to ensure viable populations and genetic diversity. And we need you to raise your voice on their behalf. So what can you do to help? Now is the time to comment on the 10-day management rule. October 29th, 2021 to January 27th, 2022 marks a 90-day public comment period, which is your opportunity to demand that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service follow the science and the court order and base the revised management rule on independent academic science rather than political pressure. Check MexicanWolves.org for important dates and helpful information so you can prepare your comment. Other ways to help: you can volunteer your time, making you a valuable partner in Mexican wolf conservation. You can follow us on social media and share your favorite messages about wolves. And you can also support the nonprofit community working to save Mexican gray wolves by making a contribution to an organization like Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, Western Watersheds Project, or Lobos of the Southwest. Your written comment on the 10-day management rule must be submitted by January 27, 2022. If you'd like more information on how to make your comment count, please reach out. You can also learn more at virtual public meetings on November 18th, which is next week, December 8th, and January 11th. Check MexicanWolves.org for links to meeting registration. Mexican gray wolves are running out of time, but it's not too late. Let's help them win the race against extinction. If not now, when? And if not us, then who? Join us in fighting for their future. I want to thank you all for your time and your passion and commitment to wolves. And I want to pass things on to our next panelist, a local resident who will share the story of how he got involved and why he felt it was so important to do more to support Mexican wolf conservation. Passing this over to you.
Wonderful, Erin. Thank you so much. So what we'll do next is we will play the video, Mike, and then we'll bring you back on along with the panelists to talk about the video and do some Q&A. So Erin, you can stop sharing your screen. And we'll ask everyone to turn off their cameras except the video.
It is another female.
Good. Lots of potential puppy makers here. So I have a mark on this feeding tube that tells me exactly where the stomach is. So we'll pass this feeding tube down the esophagus till we hit that mark. It's pretty hard to go into the trachea, and if you do, they start coughing, but we'll do a test with saline every time just to make sure we're not in the trachea. If you think about you having a tube run down your throat and it hits your airway, you're gonna start coughing and choking and gagging, and kind of like when something goes down the wrong pipe. We always test it first. Because saline in the lungs is not a bad thing, but formula in the lungs could be a potentially disastrous thing. Mark, looks like
I got it.
oh, you got it?
I got it. That's an old mark.
Okay, down the hatch. All right. And then we're going to do a quick physical on her. Temperature, pulse, respiration. When I tube feed her, I checked her roof of her mouth to make sure there's no cleft palate or congenital anomaly. And so we just want to get vitals and really try to get them into the den as quickly as possible.
Which dens are these going into again?
So these pups will be going into the Panther Creek den in Arizona. We actually used Panther Creek as a cross foster last year. That female recruited 5 pups to the end of the year, it's quite a bit. And one of those that recruited to the end of the year and survived was a cross foster. So we've been doing cross fostering of Mexican wolves as these little pups, 14 days old and less, since 2014. And it's been a successful way of initially releasing wolves from captivity into the wild, and it's an alternative to releasing adult wolves into the wild from captivity. Adults that are naive have never been in the wild. These pups go into the wild and they're raised wild, and so it's a successful alternative to those adult releases from the wild or from captivity. Since 2014, we've documented at least 10 cross-fostered pups have survived to the end of the year. A number of those are adults, have reached breeding age, and have had multiple litters, which is the ultimate goal, is to get the genetics from these animals reproducing and represented into the wild. So it's quite the success story. A lot goes into it. It's a big collaborative effort, from the planning of having the pups available in captivity to the different captive facilities working to bring pups out, to the field team finding wolf dens and actually making the cross foster itself happen. So quite the remarkable story and successful as well. So
How many are in the wild that you know of?
So there's a minimum of 163 wolves in the wild right now, as of our last count in 2019, and we have documented at least 10 of the cross fosters survived. At least 9 of those are collared and currently alive right now in that wild population.
What territory do they cover?
So it's basically eastern Arizona and western New Mexico for now, and then as the population increases and expands, that occupied territory will expand as well. Anything else you need to do?
I'm good with them.
Okay.
I got 4 healthy puppies ready to go.
Fantastic. That's about as quick as it goes and good as it gets. Nice job.
Wonderful. Let's have all our panelists come back for Q&A. And first we'll chat with Mike about that video.
Hi, guys.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Can you hear me okay, Mike?
Yeah. What would you like me to talk about? The process?
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear how you even got involved in the first place.
I fly for a organization that you saw there at the end called Lighthawk, and they have a lot of different customers, and the wolf program is one of those customers. I've done about 4 of the transfers of the pups from various breeding centers around the Midwest to Springerville, which is in eastern Arizona. I've also had up to 1,000 baby quail in the back of the airplane on 4 different flights.
Wow.
I've transferred condor eggs. Just a lot of different organizations call them Lighthawk. We're an organization of volunteer pilots all across the United States. And some of our planes have certain missions that we can do. Other missions I can't do because it requires removing a door for photography purposes and that kind of thing. But this one is particularly suited for my type of aircraft and the speed that we can get them from point A to point B. Which typically this was the film actually was a combination of a couple different transfers. We brought wolves in from St. Louis, and this group here came in from Wichita. So it requires me going in the night before and spending the night because we typically have a 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. departure, and bring the wolves in. We need to give them enough time in Springerville to offload the pups, and in some cases go through the medical check that you saw. And but during that time, the Arizona Fish and Wildlife people have located wild dens for placement of these wolves. And typically they'll have at least 2 dens because, again, they don't know how many pups are in the den, and the mom can handle about 7. So they could go out there, and we have spotters, or they do on these wild dens, and they'll take the backpack the pups out. And that's when they go in and they find out how many are in there. If they've already got a full brood, then they may take some of ours and put them in there and pull 3 of the other ones out, move the 3 to another den, and so on. And if they have a problem placing them, then we are on standby to fly them back to their breeding center, which they'll spend the rest of their life at the breeding center. My understanding is they used to bring full adult wolves out, but problem is being around humans for so long, when you put full adult wolves out in the field, they have a tendency to come on people's porches and eat dog food and this kind of stuff. So that wildness has been, reduced to the point where they get too friendly with people. So this program here has been a success and continues to be, and hopefully, we'll be able to continue to bring these guys out here to do this. So it's a lot of fun. It's hard, I've got a permit to fly from the folks, and unfortunately, they know how many pups I've got, because in some cases, I'd like to be able to pick up 5 and deliver 4, because they're just absolutely so cute. But they're a lot of fun, and a lot of times their eyes aren't even open yet, and this all has to be done within the first 14 days. So I've had pups that have been 11 days old to right at the limit of 14 days.
Well, for all of us who, are voice for wolves, advocate or educate on behalf of wolves, you having that experience is amazing, because so many, literally none of us will ever have that type of experience. So that's really incredible. Does anyone fly with you when you transport?
Yeah, that was really cool. And one of the fun things, my daughter was the one that was peeing the little pups in the back, and that was during COVID, when we couldn't have anybody on board ship unless it was family member. And she's with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but this wasn't an official thing, but she had a ball doing it, and I really appreciated her help on that program because I couldn't pee him and fly the airplane at the same time. So she was an integral part of that transfer, because it was a pretty long transfer.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Well, that just sounds amazing. And, I didn't know about the condors and the quails. I did know that you also volunteered your services for veterans. So I just want to thank you. That's really admirable how you've been able to help so many and so many organizations and animals and humans alike. So thank you very much for that. That's
Well, that's a lot of fun. I'm a pilot, so pilots don't need a lot of excuse to fly.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to bring back the whole panel and do Q&A for everybody. Switch to gallery, and if we could get Erin, there we are, Emily, Greta, there. Okay, we've got our panel, and we'll go ahead and hide all the non-video participants and get into some Q&A. So I'll start with you, Emily, because being here in Sedona, the Red Rock News, our local paper, I do have to give a shout out to, because they've been really tracking Anubis's story here. And I'm pleased to see the attention and awareness that this has gotten, because we do know that these wolves need to disperse in order to thrive. How many wolves do you think have dispersed to northern Arizona besides Anubis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know of at least 10 wolves that have dispersed to northern Arizona. Some of them that have been collared with tracking collars have been captured and removed very quickly, really before we even knew they were here. Other ones have been confirmed sightings of uncollared wolves, and we really don't know what the fate of those wolves is. Usually, we don't actually publicize wolf locations when we learn about them, because we want to do whatever we can to keep dispersing wolves safe for as long as possible. I think the situation with Anubis was just so unique in the fact that we found out they were actively trying to capture him in mid-June. And so we didn't really have that much time to raise awareness, because we thought he could be captured any day. And then at the same time, the national forest actually closed to all public entrance because there was really high fire danger at the end of June and early July. So that gave Anubis about 2.5 weeks of complete freedom with no public entering the forest whatsoever. Even Arizona Game and Fish was not allowed to enter the forest during the closure period. So that was pretty exceptional, and we decided to go public with that information. And I'm so glad we did make that decision, because he's just been a really remarkable wolf, and we need to celebrate the stories of these dispersing wolves.
Absolutely. And would you mind just sharing with everyone how Anubis was named?
Yeah, actually, Lobos of the Southwest, a collaborative effort, does a pup naming contest every winter that's open to school kids all over the country. And so that's actually open right now. If you know any children that are interested in helping to name Mexican wolf pups, they can do that, I think, through February. And then once they are collared, as wolves are collared and given a stud book number in the wild at the end of your count, then they'll be assigned a name from the naming contest. And so Anubis was actually named by 3 7th grade boys who live in Utah. And it was assigned to his stud book number 2520. And so that means he's actually, Anubis is an Egyptian god of the underworld. So it's kind of a cool name for a pretty cool wolf.
Great, great. Greta, I have a question for you. So now that you have all of those reports, and clearly quite a few of them are suspect, we have a lot of members in the audience who'd like to know what's the next step with that? What can be done to try and create some change there?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. We've tried to get media attention on this story to sort of make the public aware that the depredation reports may be being falsified. We have reported it to politicians who have expressed concern about the ways this may be changing the program. We've presented the information to Wildlife Services and the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service as a way of telling them we know that the books are being cooked, or at least not being managed very well. And ultimately, this information will hopefully help reform some of the reporting practices. In fact, just last summer, Wildlife Services decided that agents in the field in New Mexico were no longer allowed to make the calls about confirmed, probable, or possible wolf kills, and that they had to just gather the information and then send it up to their superiors. So we thought that that was a good advance because it means that the accountability is going higher up in the agency, which means the stakes are also higher for the people who are making the calls.
Great. Erin, I have a question for you, and you and I have spoken about this a couple of times. Is obviously we had the delisting of the gray wolf, and currently Mexican gray wolves is still protected. And yes, there's this process and a comment period and an ongoing thing. But do you think there's any chance that Mexican gray wolves would be removed from the ESA despite the recovery program that's supposed to be in place?
So just to make sure I understand the question, is there a chance they would be potentially delisted outside of normal ESA processes? Yeah, I think, while this is speculative, we have seen examples of acts of Congress delisting gray wolf populations in other areas. So while I want to hold out hope that Mexican gray wolves will continue to have the protection of the law that they need to recover, I think being aware of groups and forces that are against wolf recovery is really important, because there can be challenges to recovery programs. And I think that is something that we need to continue pushing back against, to make sure that endangered species like Mexican gray wolves and gray wolves and red wolves and all of the many other important species that we have here enjoy the protection of the law and get the support that they need to meaningfully recover in the wild.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all know wolves are very political. It doesn't matter regardless of party, right? They're very political. And so that's why I was asking the question, because I do believe in, anything could happen. Interesting, I looked it up. I think it said we have 67 species in Arizona alone protected under the ESA, which I thought was quite interesting. So yes, okay, great. Well, we're at the end of our time, and this was really fascinating because I had about 7 more questions for all of you. Any closing comments from anyone? No? Okay, well, thank you so much for all that you do. And Mike, thanks so much for joining us and being a part. And we look forward to seeing more videos from you. And Greta, Emily, and Erin, I'll see you on our next Zoom call.
Thanks so much.
All right, we're going to cut to Tanya now and go to break.